tonight we'll talk a little bit about domestic violence. We'll focus on a lot of the emergency protective orders and all of the stuff surrounding that. And then I'll briefly touch on some of the other child crimes. And then at the end, my other colleagues is going to come in and talk about the actual missing person investigations. A little bit about myself. I've been in the unit for a little bit over 2 years now. Before that, I worked at a number of assignments, but most of my duties were in Southside Richmond. I am a Spanish speaker, so I did a lot throughout the department, just helping translate when I worked patrol. I did a lot of investigations just to help those detectives speak with those Spanish-speaking individuals, whether victims or offenders. It's kind of basic. What is defined as a domestic assault in Virginia? Domestic assault is an assault and battery against a family or household member. Any person who commits an assault and battery against a family or household member is guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. And I forgot to mention throughout this presentation at any point, if you guys have any questions, just speak up, let me know, and we'll kind of stop, address it, and continue moving forward. So that is the legal definition in Virginia of domestic assault. It is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Now with that, once you are convicted of it twice, your third one will automatically become a Class 6 felony. So once you are convicted of your third one, that the third one and any substantial ones moving forward, it's going to be a felony. Now, in terms of household members, it's very defined in the code books, but in general, it includes children, grandchildren, spouse, aunts, uncles, in-laws. It also includes step parents, as well as anybody who lives in the house. If you're not married, but you have a child in common, it's also considered domestic assault. If you live together and you're into some type of intimate relationship, it's considered a domestic situation. And if you were intimate, were married at any point within the last 12 months, but you've separated and live in a different household, that is considered a domestic relationship. This kind of goes through some of that. Like I said, any person cohabitated within the last 12 months, in-laws, and then most of the people you would kind of think about living together. Don't know how much it differs from state to state, but like I said, in Virginia, that third offense automatically becomes a felony. So the other thing with this is once you're convicted of it the first time at the misdemeanor level, you are not able to have a firearm. They changed the law a couple years ago, and it's kind of becomes a little stricter now. But the moment you're charged with a domestic assault on somebody, then once you are charged with that and you know you have that charge and you're served, if you have any type of weapons in the home, you must get those up. Not necessarily to the police department. You can give it to a friend, you can give it to a family member, but they cannot be in your possession anymore, at least until the trial goes through and you either get found guilty or not guilty. If you're found guilty, then you just can't have a firearm at all. If you're found not guilty, then at that point you can go back and retrieve those firearms. Any questions so far? Anything? Nobody not. Okay. So domestic assault, most people think is you come home and start fighting with your spouse, and they start assaulting you, hitting you with something, hitting you with a fist, with an item, a weapon of some kind. But it also has different forms. One of the most common ones we see doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have any type of physical assault by another individual. It starts small and it can be seen a lot in these smaller things and slowly escalates to the point where it becomes a physical confrontation. So the person can destroy the other person's phone, any type of property. Usually they'll start with the phone just because that's the way you communicate, that's the way you can get help. So they'll take that person's phone, destroy it. So as it escalates, they don't have anywhere to call 911 or a family friend to come help them. It can also be seen through pets. If your spouse starts threatening to harm your pet, especially if they see it as more as your pet than their pet, and they actually get to physically harm the pet, that's also a sign that there is some type of domestication in the home. And it could escalate from the pet to the kids to then yourself. A couple other way you see it escalating is in the form of control. A lot of the times when we investigate these type of cases, we kind of go back, talk to the victim, talk to other family members, and they say that they're very controlling of a lot of aspects in their life, whether that's going out with friends, whether that's work, going out with family members. They're very controlling. They don't want you to talk to anybody because if you have domestic violence going on in the home, they want to limit the amount of contact you have with outside individuals so you don't disclose that domestic violence happened. And then most of the ones you kind of see on social media and regular just TV and shows is that common husband and wife scenario where the husband assaults the wife. She has bruises, so she doesn't go out. She covers herself up to keep other people from asking questions. And it becomes very dangerous because it starts like that. It starts with the small things like the phone, like the control. Then it escalates to actually being physical. And then from that point, it could get worse to the point where it could be fatal for that victim just over time because they get more angry. Eventually, the victim feels like they need to say something and they get just so upset and angry at that person that it gets to the point where we have a fatality coming from it. You also see it in the kids, so they won't harm the victim themselves, but they'll harm the victim's kids. They'll say it's punishment for whatever something they did, when it is definitely not punishment. You can see that excessive force being used against the children, so they have bruises and marks over any little thing. But that's kind of the bulk of the domestic assault. A lot of the investigations we do, we have resources for victims. So we have the YWCA, which specifically works with women. So it's called the YWCA. If you're a victim of a domestic assault, you're a female, they'll help with housing. They'll also give you different resources. In the unit, we have a full-time detective who just works domestic assault. Every morning he comes in, kind of goes through the domestic assault report. He follows up with those victims, kind of provide additional resources if they need to. And then make sure they're in a safe environment and works with them as well as with the Commonwealth attorney when they go to trial to try to get that guilty verdict. The other thing that he does is he calls the victims and makes sure that they have the resources that they need. Even if nothing was done that night or there wasn't a charge taken out that night for whatever other reason, he follows up to with that victim to make sure that that is something they want to move forward with. He also provides contact information. That way, in the future, if it does happen again, they at least have somebody they can reach out to with questions. There's a resource here at the department that they can talk to. Now, with the domestic assault, if a patrol officer responds to the home and it is a clear domestic assault, that is a situation where they shall make an arrest. So they can prove that there's enough probable cause to determine assault happened, then one of the parties is going to be arrested. And if we can prove who it was, then at that point, he will be taken into custody that night. Any questions on anything so far? When you are charged with domestic assault and you're a victim of a domestic assault on the other side, anytime the patrol officer goes to the magistrate to swear that warrant, the protective order automatically comes with it. With the protective order, there's two different kinds of protective order. The most common one is the one most people are aware of, which is the no contact protective order. Pretty much says that that person is not to have any contact with the victim whatsoever for a determined amount of time. The other one that we see that is not as common is a no further acts of violence protective order. A lot of times this is done when they share a residence and the offender has nowhere else to go. He's got no family members, no friends in the area. That's the only place he can go back to, that's home. So they'll issue these if the victim agrees to it, where it's no further acts of violence. Not necessarily no contact, just that person is not allowed to be violent towards that victim moving forward. And if he does, then he violates the protective order at that point, acquiring an additional charge against them. The initial protective order is for 72 hours. It's called an emergency protective order. If it's issued on a weekend and those 72 hours land on a holiday or on a weekend day, it expires on the next business day at 11:59 p.m. The reason this is being done is because if that victim wants to extend that protective order, they do have to fill out a paper, bring it to the courthouse for them to extend that protective order, and that becomes a preliminary protective order at that point. And normally that is done so they can set a date because the victim wants to move forward with a permanent protective order. The reason it's done as a business day is because if it falls on holiday, and the courts are always closed on weekends and holidays, so they want to get the victim the opportunity to file that extension. Protective order can be applied by police officer, any law enforcement officer, as well as any citizen themselves. You can go into the magistrate's office, kind of explain the situation, and ask for one. If the magistrate believes you have enough probable cause to get a protective order, then they can issue that to you. Like I said, that can be done by anybody at any time of the day. Anybody have any questions on protective order so far? Yeah. Like I said, the different types of protective orders, further acts of violence, and so with further acts of violence, the abused person or household does have contact with that offender. It just prevents them from doing any further acts of violence. And then along with the protective order, they can also be added on there, possession of joint property or pets. The pets one was added a couple years ago. So if you and your spouse get into a domestic situation, you share residence, and you feel like you fear for your life or he's going to continue hurting you, then they issue you a no contact order. Along with that protective order, they can say, for the time being, the victim has primary possession of that residence. And if there's any animals in the home, especially if the couple has no kids, they don't want you to start going back and forth from the animals. So the protective order can also include any type of animal in the home, giving custody to one of the parties. The preliminary protective order, like I said, that is on the back of the emergency protective order. When you're given that, is the back of it has a form you can fill out. You would go down to our local one, it's Oliver Hill Courthouse. It does correspond to whatever jurisdiction you live in. And fill that paperwork out to extend that protective order. The preliminary protective order usually goes until whatever the court date is given for you to come testify before a judge to do that permanent protective order. The reason it's done like this is because that permanent protective order is for 2 years. And with it being that amount of time, they want to get the other party the ability to go in front of the judge and explain their side. With the emergency, the victim can go to the magistrate and talk about what happened, and they'll issue it immediately. They don't have to talk to the other party involved. With the permanent protective order, they do want to give the other party the ability to do that. Anybody have any questions on protective orders up until this point?
Hi, my name is Michelle Gopez. I actually do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the protective order protect you or actually stay valid if you move or visiting in another state?
So with the emergency protective order, not really. That permanent protective order, yes. What happens when you get the permanent protective order, you get a little card. It almost looks like an ID card that has the information on it, and it says no contact from the other person until this date. Well, in theory, the emergency protective order does protect you in another state. It becomes a little bit more difficult because the emergency protective order and the preliminary protective order is just a paper that's handed by the courts. It is put into the system, and other states could have access to it, but it takes a couple additional steps. Whereas that permanent protective order, you actually have a card you can carry around. So if you come in contact with that person comes in contact with you in another state, and you call the police at that point, it is much easier for you to show them the card and then to verify that card versus the initial two.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question, though. Anybody have any other questions? So when I initially made the PowerPoint, I thought this was going to be done in person. So there's a little card that we have at the police department. It has some general information on domestic violence. It's got a couple of resources on there that domestic violence victims can call, as well as information on the protective orders. If you go to any other precincts, they do have those cards on hand that you can get, and it's just general information to give out. So the other part of my job is child abuse investigations. A lot of our investigations start one or two ways. Either the victim calls it in or victim parents call it in. We have an officer go out, take the report, and then normally the report gets sent to us and we follow up on it, because a lot of child abuse investigation isn't something that they can do on the spot. It is something that takes a little bit of time and a little bit more investigating for it. The other way it happens is if there is a child protective services referral done. So somebody calls in to the CPS hotline, the state and a local hotline. They provide the information about what they think might be happening to a kid. They try to get as much information as they can, and then that referral gets sent over to us. That's a little bit different because a lot of times we don't interview the kids ourselves. We work with an organization called STAN. Stands for Stop Child Abuse Now. It is in Richmond. They are trained to speak to kids that go through traumatic events, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or any type of trauma, whether the victim or a witness to a violent crime. And that is usually the first step. So if you come in contact with somebody who does have a child that's going through some type of investigation like that, it's very important just for them to make sure they go through the steps and they follow it. So they bring that child in to speak to that forensic interviewer at the advocacy center, because that is how we can interview the best way to interview that victim child. And then from then on, we have the information about what happened, and the best in the investigation kind of starts. With the child protective services, a lot of times we're doing our investigations hand in hand with a social worker, a CPS worker, and we do that. So everything is done, everything is covered. The police department side is to kind of figure out any criminal thing that has happened. The CPS side is to make sure that the clients were negligent or anything like that, and they have the resources in place they need to keep that child safe. Hola, me dijeron que habían dos personas que solo hablaban español. Quería hablar un poco sobre las órdenes de protección. Con las órdenes de protección hay dos tipos de órdenes. Hay una orden de no contacto y eso es normalmente para 72 horas. Lo que pasa es cuando te dan esta orden, la persona no puede tener contacto con usted por 72 horas, a menos que la hora 72 caiga en un fin de semana o en un día feriado. Pues en ese momento sería el próximo día que la corte esté abierta. So, si se termina un domingo a las 72 horas, la empujan para ese lunes para que puedas tener la habilidad de ir a la corte y extender esa orden de protección. Para extenderla, hay una hoja que puedes llenar cuando te den la orden de protección de emergencia y la llevas a la corte. Cuando lo lleves a la corte, ellos cogen y te dan una fecha para hacer un juicio para ver si te dan la orden permanente de protección. Y en esa fecha de juicio, la persona que quieres tener la orden contra, tendrá la oportunidad de venir y decir su lado. Y en ese momento el juez decide si te dan la orden permanente. Esa orden permanente es por 2 años. Normalmente te dan una tarjeta con toda la información tuya y la de la persona que no puede tener contacto con usted. La orden puedes cogerla a cualquier tiempo, a cualquier hora. Tienes que ir a la oficina del magistrado que está en la cárcel de Richmond. Cuando entras ahí, puedes hablar con un magistrado y dejarle saber la situación y ellos se pueden dar esa orden de protección de emergencia. A esa orden la puede sacar una persona como usted, puede ser un policía, cualquier persona puede ir a hablar con el magistrado para pedirle esa orden de protección.
When a person makes a missing person report, the officer makes sure that they get detailed information One of the things that they um, specifically have to notate is if the person that is missing is disabled, endangered, or the circumstances are suspicious, the age of the person, either they're over 18 or under 18, and especially if they're 11 years or younger, they go into a special category. If the juvenile or adult is mentally handicapped or mentally ill, cannot properly care for himself or herself, the missing person, if the missing person is in need of medication or has any medical condition that may be life-threatening to him or herself or others, or the circumstances surrounding the missing person there's a possibility of foul play. If such is the case, then youth and family crimes will be contacted, and the detective from our unit will respond directly to the scene, assist with coordinating searches, canvases, and any other investigative activities.
And what age does count? What age is that?
11 and younger.
11 and younger? Okay.
Yep. Or any of the indicators that I've mentioned. We will interview any witnesses. We will make sure that the missing person's room is secured, as it could be a potential crime scene. And we will check to see if they normally what they would normally have in their possession are missing, such as backpack, purses, cell phones, chargers, keys, etc. And we will collect and maintain any and all paperwork and field notes. We work closely with state police, and so all of our missing persons report, runaways, mostly missing persons, will be, I guess the information will be given to the state police.